Hi, sweet beans. I feel like that's an appropriate nickname for you today because we are going to be talking about beans, among other things. I promise it won't just be about beans, but we are going to talk about beans a little bit. Y'all actually voted for the episode about the link between your creative energy and sensual energy, aka Eros, and I will get around to talking about that. I promise. I really want to talk about that, but I keep coming back around to this thought that I really want to and need to talk about community building after last week's episode. So that's what we're going to do today. If you haven't watched last week's episode, it was about how women need to kind of claim a sense of ego in order to feel more spiritually fulfilled, in order to have access to moments of transcendence, all of that. And I stand by everything that I said, but I am worried that if anything is misinterpreted in that last episode, it can very easily be used as advice to be a Karen in your community. Not that I think any of you would do that. I believe that you are all such sweet and lovely people, but I do want to kind of balance out the conversation a little bit because I can't say everything that I think in one episode. And that was very much just the start of a conversation that is much, much, much larger. And I think the next step in this conversation is talking about community, because right now we absolutely need community. I mean, we always do, but right now we are slipping into a fascist state. Let's all be real. The cost of living an isolated life is way too high. And I think a lot of the ways that we're thinking about community have been so wrapped up in the commodification of community and sort of like branding community, and then not engaging in community that's not like branded beautifully. We'll get to all of that. I feel like I'm kind of getting ahead of myself right now. I clearly have been researching a different topic this week, so who knows how well I will talk about this. I've also been spending all of this past weekend with my parents who are in town. Love them so much, but I do feel like I'm kind of rushing this episode out. So this might just be a part 1 with a part 2 coming soon. I just wanted to start the conversation. I think we're all thinking about community and how we can actually be builders of community in a real way and in a way that drives change. And I also don't think that anything that I'm going to be talking about in community discredits anything that I said last week. I think that if we are going to bring any big institutional systemic change to our communities, it starts on a really micro level. And I think it does start with us. And I've been thinking a lot about Robin Wall Kimmerer lately. She is a botanist and a member of the Potawatomi Nation. Hi, jumping in here just to say that I did mispronounce this. It's Potawatomi Nation. And she wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. She also wrote a book called Gathering Moss, and she just came out with another book that I can't remember the name of, but I'll pop it on the screen here. Braiding Sweetgrass I read back in 2020, I want to say, and it changed the way that I look at nature forever, but it also changed the way that I look at community. And in the last episode, I feel like I threw out the word reciprocity a few times, but I didn't expand on it because, again, I can't expand on everything in one episode. But I use the word reciprocity, and every time I use the word reciprocity, I'm thinking of Robin Wall Kimmerer and Braiding Sweetgrass. And I want to read a little bit of it to you. I kind of feel like when I say that, I'm like a kindergarten teacher that's like, I'm going to read you a book. But stick with me, okay? Because I don't want to paraphrase her. I am going to be reading a good amount of this chapter on the Three Sisters. Please stick with me. I know this is going to be a lot, but it's going to make sense at the end why I'm reading about corn and beans and squash. Okay, she says, I hold in my hands the genius of indigenous agriculture, the Three Sisters. Together, these plants, corn, beans, and squash, feed the people, feed the land, and feed our imaginations, telling us how we might live. The corn is the firstborn and grows straight and stiff. It must grow tall quickly. Making a strong stem is its highest priority at first. It needs to be there for its younger sister, the bean. Beans put out a pair of heart-shaped leaves on just a stub of a stem. The bean focuses on leaf growth, while the corn concentrates on height. Just about the time that the corn is knee-high, the bean shoot changes its mind, as middle sisters are wont to do. Instead of making leaves, it extends itself into a long vine. Touch receptors along the vine guide it to wrap itself around the corn in a graceful upward spiral. For now, it holds back on making leaves, giving itself over to embracing the corn. Meanwhile, the squash, the late bloomer of the family, is steadily extending herself over the ground, moving away from the corn and beans, setting up broad-lobed leaves like a stand of umbrellas waving at the end of hollow petioles. Petioles. I don't know if I'm saying that right. As the leaves grow wider, they shelter the soil at the base of the corn and beans, keeping moisture in and other plants out. Native people speak of this gardening style as the Three Sisters. The lessons of reciprocity are written clearly in a Three Sisters garden. Together, their stems inscribe what looks to me like a blueprint for the world, a map of balance and harmony. Acre for acre, a Three Sisters garden yields more food than if you grew each of the sisters alone. Of all the wise teachers who have come into my life, none are more eloquent than these, who wordlessly in leaf and vine embody the knowledge of relationship. Alone, a bean is just a vine, squash an oversized leaf. Only when standing together with corn does a whole emerge which transcends the individual. The gifts of each are more fully expressed when they are nurtured together than alone. In ripe ears and swelling fruit, they counsel us that all gifts are multiplied in relationship. This is how the world keeps going. There are layers upon layers of reciprocity in this garden. It's tempting to imagine that these three are deliberate in working together, and perhaps they are. But the beauty of the partnership is that each plant does what it does in order to increase its own growth. But as it happens, when the individuals flourish, so does the whole. So, all that to say, first of all, I have never been able to forget the way that Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about the natural world and personifies things that I had never heard personified before. If any of that was interesting to you, please go read it. It will probably change your life. Second of all, last episode was very much about making sure that you are taking care of your individual self, not self-sacrificing, not erasing yourself in service to others, all of that good stuff, which is very important to think about and cultivate skills towards. But it's also important to become a better community member. And I am talking to myself in this. I feel like I have been pretty good at cultivating a group of friends. But as far as genuinely being a good member of my community, I don't know that I could say that I'm great at that. I tend to be very closed off to strangers. I tend to opt out of going to things that I don't know if I'm going to know anybody there. I am not very naturally inclined to hosting things. Some of you have asked about doing some New York City events, and that sounds lovely. I would love to do that at some point. But oh my God, even just hosting something at my house, I don't remember the last time I threw myself a birthday party, if I ever have. So please keep in mind that a lot of the things that I'm talking about today are things that I am very actively in the process of trying to get better at, because I do genuinely want to get better at this. I wanted to start with that example of the Three Sisters because I think it so beautifully showcases what happens when you are cultivating a good relationship with yourself and a self-concept and an understanding of your gifts that makes it so that you can come more honestly and fully into your community. The Three Sisters speaks to the fact that when we come into community with a true acceptance and cultivation of the gifts that we bring to the table, the bounty of reciprocity multiplies, right? Everyone will come to community with a different role that they can fulfill. This is why not everyone will be in the streets protesting. There will be people staying at home taking care of the children. There will be people in the office providing legal aid. There will be people translating to facilitate better conversation. You know what I mean? Everyone's coming with their own gifts, and the more that they understand those gifts, the more fully they can show up for their community. But look, just because this doesn't come naturally to me doesn't mean that I shouldn't try. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. And I think that a lot of the messaging that we are seeing around community building is very urgent. It's like, if you don't build a community right now, you're going to die in the apocalypse. And that might be true. Who knows? I don't have a crystal ball, okay? But I think when we approach community building with that level of anxiety, it makes it really, really hard to start. And look, it's probably true that a lot of us are not as active in our community as we should be. It's probably true that we're not mobilizing politically in the way that we need to in order to create change. It's probably true that we have been leaning too heavily on digital communities versus in-person one-on-one communities with our neighbors. And there's kind of a sentiment that's going around TikTok right now that's basically saying everybody wants a village, but nobody wants to be a better villager. And look, there is truth to that. There's absolutely truth to that. People more and more are talking about like throwing events and having people RSVP and nobody comes. And there are plenty of people that will throw their money at an issue, but they won't actually show up to a community organizing event. I will admit that I have been guilty of that in the past, but I think all of the urgent, anxiety-inducing messaging around community building can really make it so that you don't feel like you even have the agency to start. And a creator named Elise Granata has a lot of incredible writing about community building on Substack on her newsletter called Group Hug. And in her piece, Becoming a High Agency Person, I was really interested in the way that she talked about community as a way to build agency. I feel like we're often talking about how good it is for your mental health because of the sense of connection and belonging, which is absolutely true. And we're also thinking about it in terms of mutual aid and being able to help each other tangibly. But the sense of agency thing really feels true because I think that on an individual level, when you are trying to navigate all of the things that are happening in the news and in the world by yourself, or maybe just you and a couple of friends, there is this sense of, well, what can I do about it? And what happens when you get in a group of people that are intentionally organizing together is that you start to build this sense of agency. Elise says, agency is about our capacity to act, to desire something and move towards it, to experience our own power having tangible effect in the world. Agency can be deadened or weakened and taken away by conditions set by people and systems and tech bent on sapping our power. I think we can all think of a ton of different people and systems and softwares that are bent on sapping that power from us. But I also kind of want to even raise the red flag about some forms of community that might not be building a sense of agency in the way that we think they are. I think there are a ton of community clubs and like hyper branded aesthetic things that you can buy into for access to a sense of community. And I am not out here with a thesis that that is all wrong. I'm sure that there are a lot of people who get a lot of benefits from that. But I also, a couple years ago, when I was feeling like my community here was way smaller than I wanted it to be, I remember kind of going from page to page of these community groups that I would have to, buy into for $50 a month or whatever in order to access different events and like meet people with similar interests to me. I thought I could buy into like the perfect community for me. And you spend so much time looking at these like aesthetic Instagrams of these communities that you can buy into. And you think this is what community building needs to look like. And first of all, if that were true, that would mean that only people that have access to that money can have access to community building. And that's just not true. But second of all, I think it's a trap to think that you can just buy into the perfect community for you. When you're signing up for community, you're signing up for being annoyed. You're signing up for hanging out with people that you don't want to hang out with. Anytime that you've been in community, there have been people that you've loved in that community and people that you've been like meh about, but you would still help them if they needed help, because they're part of your community. But anyway, the way that this ties into agency is that I feel like when you just think that you can buy into this picture perfect, Instagrammable community, you're actually not giving yourself the benefit of agency, because all you're doing is signing up for something that you pay into, and it's this hosted event that this other person completely facilitated and threw, and all you had to do was show up. And I think the whole point that Elise is trying to make in this article is the fact that it is the actual process of creating the community that creates agency within its community. So she gives a couple of examples of what she calls spiritual byproducts of the process of building community with people. Number 1, leadership opportunities. Number 2, recruiting others. And number 3, the effect on physical space or ephemera. So things like making signage, refreshing the bulletin board, creating an ugly flyer with your okay graphic design skills, arranging chairs, etc. So community building that you actually have a hands-on effect on the way that the community is run is going to build more agency than community building that you just buy into and you show up for. Elise says, strong community spaces create a chance for everybody to participate beyond simply showing up. They are high agency spaces. A volunteer finds their onboarding confusing and makes a handbook so others can more easily navigate their own journeys. An attendee sees a bottleneck happening at the event's doors and jumps in to help folks navigate. An artist wants to collaborate with others who share their identity or lived experience and curates a showcase of bands or virtual artists like them. Maybe these people were predisposed to leadership, but maybe the space itself got them so used to jumping in, lowered the bureaucratic barriers so much, baked into the collective expectation so deeply that it just became a learned sense of agency. Okay, so that's why we should be joining and creating communities that we actually have an active role in. But how do we actually get ourselves there, get ourselves to hosting, or get ourselves to showing up to a place where maybe we know nobody. Because now we're actually starting from a place where maybe we feel a very low sense of agency over all of this, and we're actually very filled with anxiety about how we have no community, because that's what we've been told by all of the headlines and by everybody on TikTok telling us that we're just no good at community and we need to get better at it. How do we actually access that sense of agency before we've started? Elise says we should rush towards sources that remind us of our own agency rather than sticking in an infinite consumptive loop. These sources are what prime us to act on the wild ideas, tiny interventions, or compassionate offers that all link together to shape active, fascinating, participatory communities. And I am truly talking from the scale of a phone call to someone you love, all the way to building a robust food redistribution network. It is all under the same tent because it all requires the same readiness from us, that capacity to have an idea and act on the idea. When I say sources, I mean media, stories, friends, art, physical space, your own personal practices. Sometimes I'm surprised at how much I get that, whoa, I'm a person with free will feeling, even when I cook and diverge from a recipe. It's the same reason I look to the artists in my life for motivation. They are world building and exercising their agency every single day in their creative practice. So while there is no perfect cookie cutter answer that will help you understand how you can get to a point where you feel the agency to act, I think this is something that we can all start to kind of get a gauge for, of like, what am I coming into contact with that makes me feel like, oh, I actually have that like oomph that I need in order to take the smallest next step towards community. It can be so small. In another article that Elise Granata wrote called 7 Ideas to Jumpstart Community Practice, the first thing that she says that is unskippable for everybody is to create a sacred time that you devote to your community building practice. And it needs to be a practice because it's probably not something that's just going to like accidentally happen for you until you've built it up as a ritual in your life. So say it's like 10 minutes on a Wednesday morning where you take the time to put all of the events that you want to do in your calendar, or 30 minutes to call somebody that you love, or an hour to do a little co-working community building session where the only guideline is that everybody is doing something within that hour to better their sense of connection with their community. But I just think generally, if we can get past this feeling that we need to pay for community in order to have access to it, and be okay with maybe showing up to an event at your library where, yeah, maybe the only people that are there are going to be 70-year-old women. Who knows? You don't know. You might show up and that's all the people that are there. And if those are all the people that are there, they live in your local community. And it's probably good to know a couple of 70-year-old women in your community. They probably could teach you a lot, and you can probably offer them something reciprocal in return. Another thing, though, with building community is that we want a sense of reciprocity, but we don't want a sense of tit for tat. It shouldn't feel like you're doing something for somebody and now they are indebted to you. Another thing in Braiding Sweetgrass that I really appreciated is this idea of a gift economy. You should be giving more than you take. And it actually does something spiritually for you when you give and you don't expect anything in return. And again, there is no perfect community that you can just buy into, and you can bypass all of the conflict and communication issues that come up with community. All of those things are a given with community. And also inconvenience is a given with community. We are going to have to show up to things fatigued. We're going to have to show up to things when we don't feel like showing up to things. We are going to have conversations with people that we don't want to have conversations with. And that's just a part of it. I also want to add that this starts so small. It can start with one person that you're bringing into your space. It doesn't always have to be in the context of community building events and like paid events. If the thought of facilitating an event or stepping into an event is too much for you, start way smaller. Start with bringing in one more person into your space and being okay with the fact that, like, in order to hang out with somebody, it doesn't always need to be this ultra formalized thing. Like, I think in adulthood, we can have a hard time sometimes feeling like we have something to prove with how we're hanging out with people. But I actually think so many people really crave the sort of hangouts that's just, I'm going to come over to your place while you do laundry and we're going to sit on the couch together. Or I'll go with you when we go to the grocery store later. You know, like an errand buddy is so great to have. And it does make me sort of sad when I get to a point with a friend where the only time that I'm seeing them is at a formalized party or brunch or something that's been like hyper planned. I love to have relationships with people where we can casually be in community. And so if all of this talk about events and community organizing is paralyzing to you, start so much smaller. Start with one person, and then each week think to yourself, what is the smallest next step that I can take to widen this network a little bit more? But opening your community to even one more person can have a web effect on your network of care. Another thing is, to build community, you need to get really comfortable with small talk. And I know a lot of people are like, I hate small talk. I'd rather just get to the part where we're having real conversations, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, when you're trying to bypass small talk, you're trying to bypass that trust building process, and you just can't do that. There's a post on TikTok that's titled How to Romanticize Small Talk that I thought was really interesting. It's by Venus Maximus. Anyway, sorry, it's by Venus Maximus. So I'm gonna read this really serious post by Venus Maximus about how to romanticize small talk. It says, small talk, a stepping stone. It is not pointless. It is permission to take up space, to respond, to stay. This is how we make room for each other. The weather as breaking news. Yes, we are discussing the rain. Yes, we are chatting about the clouds. It is a way to acknowledge that we exist here together, that we are sharing an experience. Become comfortable with repetition. Yes, your coworker is still tired. Yes, the commute is still bad. Tell me everything. Being invested in the details. What did your friend eat for lunch? Is it different than yesterday? This is a developing story. Accept that this is where trust begins. We do not start with confessions. We start with traffic and grocery lists. We start with proof that we are here. We are listening. So, thanks, Venus Maximus, for that beautiful post. And I really don't want it to feel like I'm lecturing you, because I really have not gotten a grasp on this in the way that I want to. I have amazing friends in my life, but I definitely don't feel like I'm necessarily a good villager, Like I have never been the neighbor that people just know that they can come to when they need something. I don't know my neighbors' names. Actually, that's not true. I do know some of their names, but I don't know all of their names, okay? Yeah, I don't know. I could be a better community member. I'm sure you could too. Let's not make it so urgent that we become frozen in space and lose all of our agency. We do have agency in this, and the more that we engage in our community, the bigger that sense of agency becomes. It will tangibly make your life so much better. So let's do it together. Oh, another thing that I did this past week that I feel like has been cool and helpful, and I haven't really used it yet because my parents have been in town, but maybe I'll use it now that they're gone, is that I created a shared Google Calendar, and I just went through a bunch of like the New York Public Libraries, local events. I went through some of the events that the DSA is putting on and put some of those in my calendar so that I can be politically active. I went through and put some of the events to some of the like paid events that I'm interested in on the calendar. And I just sent it off to my friends. And I said, hey, I will not be at all of these things. I do not actually have the availability for all of this. But in case any of you are interested, here's my gift to you. Go to some of these events if they sound fun, and maybe I'll be at some of them. Maybe I won't, but also you can add your own. And then it's kind of just a shared resource for you and your friends to get more involved in your community, which is always so fun and so beautiful. And that's all I have for you today. I love you, and we will get to the Eros episode next week. I promise. Talk to you later.